Welcome back. Welcome in another episode of Country Roads Confidential here at earsports.com, part of the Paramount Podcast Network. I am Mike Casaz, and continuing on here with our preview of West Virginia Big 12 opponents. Today, we stop on Texas Tech. We go to the expert of all things Red Raiders, the publisher of InsideTheRedRaiders.com, Jarret Johnson. Jarret, we were just talking about this. There's no offseason for players and teams and coaches, not for us either. And between football and basketball, it's been an eventful, a long, eventful time for you, a number of seasons and off seasons now too. But I guess what are you learning about the football team here throughout this off season with, some significant changes that we'll get into?
Yeah, Mike, first off, thanks for having me on. Y'all do a great job over there. And, the 24/7 Sports Network is just a great thing. I love doing this stuff with all the sites. So thanks for having me on. Yeah, in terms of learning this offseason, well, of course, it's a completely new regime. There's a lot of excitement in terms of Joey McGuire, the new head coach, taking over. He's done a good job of recruiting. They were as high as the top recruiting class at one point because they got so many commits so fast. But they're settling in top 20, top 15 area right now. We'll see where it ends. But on paper, it's looking really good in recruiting, of course. And then in terms of development in the team, they had a really good spring. They kept it really close to the vest. They allowed us there a lot, but then they didn't really show a lot while we were there. It was one of those things. But there weren't any major injuries, which is always good. That's always the main things you want to see. But I think the main thing right now is while there's a lot of excitement, Tech has a pretty tough schedule, a much tougher schedule this year than last year. And so we're kind of learning – all right, or trying to figure out where the expectations should be, considering, yes, there's a lot of excitement with this new coaching staff. They came off a big bowl win, good season last year. A lot of guys returning from that team. But this tough schedule, where exactly is this team? And I think there's a lot of questions out there. What kind of head coach at the collegiate level is Joey McGuire? Of course, he was a Hall of Fame high school coach. When I was at the 4-Star Telegram way back in the day, I covered some of his teams, so I'm familiar with some of his style. But this is obviously a whole nother level, whole nother game. So there's a lot of questions. Just what kind of in-game decisions is he going to make? What style exactly is the team going to play with? Is there going to be a major difference with that? And then just how are they going to use personnel? So it's definitely another interesting offseason for sure here in West Texas.
That's why we have you, Jarret. You set the table perfectly for me here. You left a whole lot of meat on that bone, though. I want to pick out it, including McGuire. We'll get to him because he's extremely intriguing to me from afar, and I'm sure up close the story is the same. But let's begin at the ending, if you will, and talk about this season here. You mentioned the schedule, and it's no joke. It's kind of ridiculous. Either opening against Murray State, fine.
Yeah.
Houston, at NC State, against Texas, at Kansas State, at Oklahoma State. No break.
No.
Going to know a lot about this team right away. And listen, they'll win the first one, I would think, unless things are bad. But those are all potentially losable games for a team that could become pretty good as it grows during the season. And then maybe it wins some of the games at the end. But I don't know if you want to play them early or late. But just the non-conference is incredible when you look at those two names. Houston and NC State. A lot of people think NC State may be like a fringe CFP sleeper. And then 3 of the top Big 12 teams all in succession too. Who do they tick off over in the athletic department there?
Yeah, these schedules are set up way in advance. So the NC State game is just kind of like the timing of it is yeesh. I was talking to a couple of people in ACC territory, and they were saying, yeah, NC State, this is probably the best team, or it's expected to be the best team they've fielded in 2 decades. So, and it's always tough to play there. They have a really good environment out there. So that's going to be interesting. That's going to be tough. As far as Houston, absolutely Houston could beat Tech. I think to not acknowledge that would be disingenuous. But at the same time, Tech has beaten them 4 straight times in the last decade or so, 12 years, including last year in Houston, though it was at NRG Stadium, the Houston, Texas Stadium. Yeah, very tough schedule. If they don't beat Murray State, then what are we even talking about to open the season at home? Houston at home, at NC State. They need to go 2-1, obviously, in that stretch. And then, like you said, Texas at home. I don't know if you have the same perspective as this, but even in recruiting and just preseason, Texas is always overrated. You know, the recruits get a bump. They get a lot of flack for not developing recruits, but you see it where, let's say, like just for example, a Texas Tech or West Virginia offers maybe a mid to high 3-star, then Texas offers, and all of a sudden they're a 4-star. And then if they go to Texas, it's like, well, maybe they weren't really a 4-star. Don't get me wrong, they get great talent, but I think some of that is inflated. So that's just my philosophy on that with Texas. And then again, they're always preseason ranked really. Like I didn't have them winning the conference or even in the top 3, honestly. But also Tech struggles against even poor Texas teams. So I can't sit here on paper and say, oh, that's a win, Texas at home. And then Kansas State, even bad Kansas State teams have owned Tech lately. I think the last win Tech has had against Kansas State was at home in 2015 when Patrick Mahomes was here, and they had an old Big 12 running back in DeAndre Washington too. So, I mean, that's something they're going to have to end. They're going to have to end that streak. And then at Oklahoma State, who figures to be, to challenge for, the Big 12 title again, and good team. And they had Tech's number for a long time, but Tech has won a couple games in the last 4 years against Oklahoma State when they were ranked. So even though it's there, I think they won in Stillwater 3 years ago. It gets a little hazy here, runs together, but relatively recently. I'm not marking that as a win, but bottom line is they got to win one of those 3 games. They have to split those first 6 games before they get that bye, because the rest of the schedule is tough. You have West Virginia's tough, Baylor. You have Kansas, thankfully, for Texas Tech, but it's a really tough schedule. Yeah. And the overall goal with the schedule, when I look at it, is getting back to a bowl. If they win 6 games in the regular season, get to another bowl, all the benefits of that, the extra practice, being able to use it on the recruiting trail, all that, it could be a good foundation moving forward with some of the recruiting that Joey McGuire and his staff is doing.
I got to think West Virginia is circling the October 22 game. Neil Brown hasn't beaten Texas Tech yet. That's the one time in the schedule, Jarret, where the opponent has more preparation time than West Virginia. It's kind of a strange thing. Like West Virginia's schedule is pretty conducive to like extra rest, extra days, even on like days where there's like a Thursday game or something like that. They have more time than the opponent. That's the one. They're coming off an open week and they got to travel all the way to Lubbock. So that could be an advantage to them, especially if they try to get to 6 wins. But I understand the goal, especially for a first season head coach and a schedule that looks like that. That seems like a pretty obvious topic to be talking about down in Lubbock, which leads me to this. Let's go to the opposite of that. You know this team, you know this program. People who follow your website certainly do. I would hope that people who follow West Virginia want to know about Texas Tech. They would navigate on over and check you guys out and see what the deal is. So the obvious stuff is obvious. Jarret, what's off the radar? What's kind of like just beneath the surface that has your attention? Someone you're going to be keeping an eye on. Maybe it got your attention in the spring. You want to see it in the fall. Maybe you expect it to become a big deal in the fall. But, come the time these 2 teams play, West Virginia fans, Texas Tech fans are going to say, you know what, Jarret was right. I heard on that podcast. This thing that I've been following for a while, and here it is. Who or what do you think it is? Something that could matter that we might not be talking about now.
Yeah, I say this, and it's on the website, but it doesn't get a lot of traction because it's not, air quotes, sexy. But the right side of Texas Tech's offensive line is a problem. They have very good skill positions coming back. Everybody wants to talk about the quarterback, but I really like all 3 quarterbacks in consideration. Running back is about as good as Tech has had in a while. Receivers, they have a stable of them. Big dudes, fast dudes, highly rated guys. And they have some veterans coming back on the left side of the offensive line. But the right side of the offensive line, they've gone to the transfer portal. They're going to plug some guys in there. A guy named Cole Spencer, who was at Western Kentucky, was Zach Kitley, the new offensive coordinator. He was an all-conference player in Conference USA, so they expect him to be a good player at right guard. But right tackle, if I'm a opposing defensive coordinator, I'm putting my best pass rusher on that guy and trying to single him up somehow, figuring out how to get him singled up. Because there's about 3 or 4 guys auditioning. And my thing is, there's a dark horse who I like named Ethan Card. He's 6'8", 315 pounds, and he's known as an athlete. Like, he's a good golfer. I don't know how a guy that size actually can even swing on a consistent basis. for you golfers out there. But he's a good athlete. He started some games early in his career, but struggled. He was, a lot of people didn't notice, but he had a really bad back injury, but persevered through that, but struggled due to that back injury and just some inexperience. He looked really good in the spring. He's healthy. If he can solidify that right tackle spot, that could be huge for Texas Tech's offense, because they have a lot of the pieces to be a really good offense with Zach Kitley coming in as new offensive coordinator. So that's something where, if that takes place, if they solidify that spot, perhaps the ceiling grows by a game or two and they surprise some folks in the Big 12. If not, then that bowl game opportunity might be in jeopardy, because the margin for error is so thin. Perhaps this season in the Big 12 as much as ever. Seems like there's some good teams, not necessarily great teams, not a lot of poor teams. There's solid Big 12 teams this year, so the margin for error is just really thin, and that's something that could really hinder Texas Tech if they don't figure that out.
Again, we'll pin that because West Virginia's defensive line, and they kind of hope the pass rush could be a strength this year. And if you can kind of get through one side, turn it into a turnstile, that certainly helps their pass rush there. So we'll keep an eye on that one there. Let's pivot to kind of a specific question for Texas Tech. The Joey McGuire story is really cool if you're just learning it or if you followed for a long time. I really struggle to think of a hire in recent years that made a lot of people in the sport and around the sport happier than this one, because everybody seems to like him in that state, whether they cover the state, if they're in high schools or colleges, because he just seems like a good guy. And then I look at his coaching staff and you start to see it too, like the names and the quality of coaches. Like you mentioned Kitley, but also Marcel Yates is a defensive coordinator from Boise State in Arizona. I'm trying to think who else is on this staff now too. Kenny Perry's a guy that a lot of people have had high hopes for before as a coach or high praise for. Tim DeRuyter's there. That's a name a lot of people know. There's just quality up and down the coaching staff, and they're all building something. Like he obviously has this vision here, McGuire, because of his experience and his connections. And here it is. It's working. And by the way, as you mentioned, they had the #1 recruiting class for a while too. Now, is it going to stay that way? Probably not. In fact, I think they've had some people picked off and it's not #1 anymore, but it happened, and that's because they were producing. What is he building there from the inside out when it comes to staff, infrastructure, culture, and why is it working so far?
Well, there's a number of factors here, but I think it all starts, and I think Coach McGuire would say this, with relationships. And you hear that a lot, and I think it's overused sometimes, but not in this case. As I mentioned before, I actually worked when I was at the newspaper in Fort Worth, Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I cover a lot of high school sports, and I work with McGuire some. I work with Coach Kenny Perry a lot more. He was at Arlington Bowie, which has produced a lot of Division I talent, and they've never been better than when he was there as the head coach. And they're the type of people that have an open door policy, and it's with other coaches, media, you name it. And I don't know where they find the time, but Coach McGuire is the kind of dude that makes everybody, when he's talking with them individually, feel like the most special person in the room. And the residual of doing that for decades is what you're seeing, where people they want him to have success, whether it be other head coaches around the state or younger generations, like kids of players who played for Coach McGuire, kids of coaches who coached with McGuire and Kenny Perry and Emmett Jones. Zarnell Fitch, the defensive line coach they got from TCU, has been huge in recruiting. They're recruiting defensive line better than I've ever seen Texas Tech. Maybe in the 90s they did better, but that was a little before my time. But it's just creating these relationships. Like going around town, everybody has a story, their own personal story with Coach McGuire and how he took time out of his day to make them feel special. So there's a genuineness to it, which is, you got to be genuine if you're going to succeed in West Texas and at Texas Tech. So those are the first things. But then work ethic, ability. I think they have some really good personnel in terms of head of recruiting, player personnel. James Blanchard is a superstar. He was at Baylor. He went with Matt Rule to Carolina for a season, but came back to join Coach McGuire's staff. He's amazing. He's as good as I've ever seen in that role. So they have a lot of things working for them. But I just circle back to, I have my own story from 2013 or something when Coach McGuire helped me with high school playoff scenarios, which is always challenging, especially if you're challenged with math like I am.
I know the story.
So right, he has he actually helped me where he had a big board of the whole state mapped out of playoff scenarios. Ironically, Coach Kenny Perry told me when I called him for help this one year with playoffs, some confusing playoff scenarios, he said, "Call Joey McGuire, he's got you." And it was very much like the meme or conspiracy theory where people were like, all these things are tied together. But he helped me out, and he was very genuine and very cool. And so many people have stories like that, and even more so. And that matters. That matters in college sports. That matters in Texas. And his role as the head of the Texas High School Coaches Association and how he helped out so many coaches, it has been huge. And so you have basically this giant network of high school coaches who are sending him guys before they're known. I've had to create more recruiting profiles of guys who've blown up and end up getting offered by Alabama and Texas that Tech was the first ones to find out about because these coaches want to see McGuire succeed. So those kind of relationships and his reputation is just invaluable.
It's a great story. It's like it's like a Friday Night Lights kind of thing. You think about it, it's cliche, but you're talking about a guy who I want to say 14 years at Cedar Hill. He was almost 100 games above 500, 3 state titles. One was in 06 and the next 2 were in 12 and 13. So he got there, didn't get there, and then got back there again. And I think this is his 6th year in college football. Like, it's quite a rise for him, and earned too. I think a lot of people were happy to see that. And usually sometimes you get jealousy among hires or you're like, what happened here? But I think a lot of people were pretty happy and thought that was well earned there too. So there's a star on the sideline. I mentioned some of the staff. You've kind of ticked off a couple positions to watch there, 2 positions of strength on offense, obviously, kind of like their secondary, Jarret, which is not something that you often say about Texas Tech, or at least that side of the ball. But let's kind of tick off some players here. Who are guys to watch that could elevate this team to where it wants to be?
Yeah, their safety position is as good as it's been since, Tech was nationally relevant back when the Mike Leach era. They have 3 safeties I really like. Muddy Waters is a guy transferring from Duke. He was a big-time player there in the ACC. He came in last year, had a really good start to the season, got hurt, missed most of the year, was granted another season. He's going to play a hybrid-type role for Texas Tech, which, I'm not saying he's going to be an NFL player necessarily, but he has an NFL-type body. He's as experienced as you're going to find even in this COVID eligibility extra year era. So I really like him. Reggie Pearson transferred in from Wisconsin. He was a starter and one of the most physical players on the Badgers defense when they went to the Rose Bowl that year. I don't remember if they won or not, but as a redshirt freshman, he's a really good player. He's very versatile, but adds a physical element. And I think we call him Rabbit, but Dadrian Taylor Demerson could be one of Tech's best players. And to me, he's an all Big 12 performer, even in games when Tech struggled on defense, where there was last season where it was really hard to find a bright spot. He was a bright spot. I think he was an all-state running back coming out of Oklahoma and immediately was moved to safety, got some playing time as a freshman, and he's steadily developed. I think that guy's going to be a really good player, and I think he has a bright future in the NFL. I really do believe that about him. So those 3 guys are actually going to be on the field a lot at the same time. As y'all know, if you're listening to this, you're a college football fan. I mean, solid safety play can really clean up a lot of mistakes and areas of, I'd say, weaknesses or non-strengths. So I really like that position. Corner, they bring back some experience, but safety's where the strength is this year. And they return a lot of veteran guys on the defensive line who are good players. Tyree Wilson is going to be playing a stand-up, one of those hybrids everybody has now, defensive end, like a rush linebacker. He's going to be in coverage some, but they're going to move him around the defense, and they're going to, like I was saying, how people should attack Tech's right tackle position. They're going to try and find weaknesses and really get him, in some advantageous situations so he can get after the quarterback. So if things fall into place the way they're saying, then yeah, I think Tech's defense is going to be improved next year.
Adrian Fry's still around too, right?
He is, and he's one of the coolest guys I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
He's a really smart, intelligent dude. He was a freshman All-American as a corner. Then the Wells coaching staff moved him to safety, and he struggled mightily. He's been moved back to corner. He's playing some kick return or punt return for Tech as well, so he'll be in the mix there. And he adds depth, but he's a guy you root for. You can't help it. You get to know him through the recruiting process and watch him develop. He's just a really neat, good human being, it seems like. And I'm rooting for him to have a good season, but we'll just have to see because it's been very up and down for him in his career.
Last one with Jarret Johnson here from Inside the Red Raiders. We began at the ending with the outlook for the season, how it might finish. Let's end at the beginning. Everything in the Big 12 starts with quarterback play. You can go from top to bottom in the standings and find a storyline with quarterback. No different out in Lubbock, Texas. I thought it was a two-person race. You mentioned three. I've heard that from now multiple sources, none better than you, of course, but they have guys who can do different things. It may just depend on what the offense leans to or what's already leaning to already, but maybe there's one quarterback who's just so good they have to wrap the offense around him. Who do we have here and how does it look?
Well, I'll start with Tyler Shuck. He transferred in from Oregon. He started for Oregon for a while. They brought in a new offensive coordinator out of Oregon, and they were rotating this guy in kind of in red zone situations. So he didn't like that situation. He transferred out to Tech. Had a pretty good start to last year, put up some good numbers. Started that win over Houston, like I mentioned in the opener. Was a little up and down though, and he has everything you want in terms of measurables. 6'5", like he's 225. I think he runs a 4.7. He doesn't have a lot of wiggle, but he's the kind of guy, if the play breaks down, he can sprint straight line and move the chains. Strong arm. He's the kind of dude you see in spring ball where the ball never hits the ground unless the receiver just drops one right in his hands. He was actually throwing into like 60-mile-per-hour gusting winds out here in West Texas in spring ball. He was.
You don't say wind in Lubbock, huh?
Yeah, right. But even for Lubbock, it was like, hold on to your hat. And you can't, you better be wearing like goggles or something or shades so you don't get sand in your eyes. It was that kind of day. It was the day that everybody says don't go to Lubbock for. And he was throwing deep outs like it was nothing. Which I was like, okay. And the only other guy I've seen do that out here was Mahomes. So I was like, this guy's arm is as strong as you could ask for. Now that's when doesn't have a pass rush in his face and all that. There have been some times where it seems like he kind of panics in the pocket, and I don't think it's because he's scared to get hit. He's a tough dude and all that. I think it's just that he wants to succeed. One of those. So that needs to improve. Going through his progressions, being calm in the pocket, all that stuff. But if that happens, then yeah, the sky's the limit for this guy because he was already on draft boards going into last season just because of his tangibles. And then intangible, he's a great guy. I mean, we had him on our radio show a couple times. He kind of guy stays after and signs autographs for all the kids. Just good dude. Supposed to have a great work ethic. So I really like Tyler Shuck. It's just, can he take that next step in terms of when the bullets are flying? And then there's Donovan Smith, who is 6'5", 240 with just a tank. And he played some last year, started a lot of the games at the end of last year as a redshirt freshman, won the bowl game against Mississippi State, looked great, started the big win against Iowa State, which got Tech bowl eligible last year, and actually watched him. He played his senior season at Friendship, which is a local school here, and he was just amazing. He's a lot more elusive than I think people give him credit for. He may not be as fast as Tyler Shuck, actually, but he's still a better definitely short yardage because he's so big option as a runner. I think they will use him no matter who starts in that with that ability in the red zone some. But he has a good arm. I think it's a misnomer to say he didn't have a good arm. He has a very strong arm. He throws the most catchable ball of all three of them, puts a nice touch on the ball when need be. And he's a gamer. He might have two or three and outs, but then when you need that third down and long throw, he'll put it on his receiver. So I really like Donovan Smith. I think if I had my choice, I would probably say, Donovan Smith should start this season. They didn't ask me, of course. And then the third guy, Baron Morton, one of the most highly rated guys Tech's ever signed, former Elite 11 guy. I mean, his dad's a coach, been a very successful coach out here in West Texas. Of course, Donovan Smith's dad is a coach. He's a running back coach for the New York Giants. Used to be a running back coach at Tech too. So he has that as well. But Baron Morton, man, I love this kid. Got to know his family some, his mom, especially his dad. Great family, great people. All three of these quarterbacks can throw on the run. He may be the best at it, which is saying something. Very strong arm, very athletic. He's not as big. He's 6'2". I think he's like 215 right now. So he has a good, he's big enough, and he has the arm, all the tools. It's just getting that experience. Last year was his true freshman season. He looked a lot better this spring than he did last spring as an early enrollee. So he's progressed enough to be in the conversation, and he might get an opportunity this year, but he might be the quarterback of the future, despite Shuck and Smith still having eligibility after this season remaining.
Shook still has eligibility after this season?
Yeah, we made the COVID. I know. He transferred in with 3 years of eligibility remaining. So
crazy. Well, it sounds like one way or another, they're in good hands, whether it's at the position, leadership, different parts of different sides of the ball. Should be fun to watch. And now we know where to train our eyes once the season begins. Jarret, can't thank you enough for scheduling this, taking out the time to help me out. Where can people find you? What can they expect over at your site?
Yeah, InsideTheRedRaiders.com. Part of the 24/7 Sports Network. What to expect is just more craziness, conference realignment. We're trying to stay plugged in just like everybody else to what's happening. Recruiting's great, better than ever for both Tech football, Tech basketball. Expect a very exciting football and basketball season. So expect more craziness. You can find me at Twitter at Johnson Jarret, and you can find Inside the Red Raiders at TTU247. So Mike, thanks for having me. And man, anytime. I always enjoy doing this stuff with y'all because, like I said before, y'all do an amazing job over there.
You're the best, and we're better for having listened to your wisdom. Jarret, thanks. We'll do this again soon.
Sounds good.